Everybody here and also the web audience. My name is Robert Waldrop. I am the practice leader for the GTS Global Trade practice. And today I'm going to talk to you about a very bold and ambitious topic, which is how GTS will help create millions of jobs and keep the world safe. And we'll go through that, and you'll still have time for lunch. Just one slide on who we are. We are the longest-standing GTS partner practice. Leader in market share, client references. We've been doing this for a very long time. Those are some of the clients that we've helped with GTS. One of the things that distinguishes us from perhaps some of our competitors is all of our consultants are industry trained. We're very compliance savvy. So we know the technical part, but we also emphasize the trade compliance part. And you'll see a little of that today as we go through this presentation. So what we wanted to talk about today are two major initiatives that have taken place in 2009 and 2010 by the Obama administration. The first is the National Export Initiative. The second is the Export Control Reform Initiative. They're separate, but they both have a common set of goals, which focus on increasing U.S. exports, U.S. competitiveness, and U.S. jobs. Little detail about them and how they're different. The NEI is focused on promotion, financing of small business and medium-sized and large business, and removal of trade barriers, emphasis on free trade agreements, and enforcement of trade rules. The ECR, the Export Control Reform, is more focused on regulations, how to streamline the regulations which have become very complex and very convoluted to promote competition of U.S. companies globally. And why do you care? So this sounds like something the government's doing. It's good for the U.S., but is it good for you? And that's, I think, the point of this conversation is, are you going to be ready? This is the most significant period of U.S. exports, the most significant period of U.S. trade since the Tariff Act of 1789. And for those of you too young to remember, that's when tariffs were first incorporated into U.S. law. What role does GTS have in this? Well, in order to keep up with all of these changes, in order to have your company basically keep up with the growth that you could take advantage of, you need a very nimble system. You need a system that you can change as these regulations occur. And this is what GTS will provide you. So, does anyone here not know what GTS is, Global Trade Services? Anyone not use it? I can't ask the web audience, but I can ask you guys. So, in the briefest way possible, GTS gets your goods across borders. It integrates in with your supply chain, your inbound and your outbound supply chain. And it ensures that you do three things. Follow all the laws that your company is obligated to follow, depending on the industry that you're in and the country that you operate from. Minimize your payments of duties, fees, and taxes, and communicate with customs and customers and logistics providers and vendors. In a nutshell, in a very small nutshell, that's what GTS does. It provides you the benefits of automating your processes through integration, standardization of several areas. The areas are listed there. Supports your future growth, process improvement in supply chain and outside of supply chain, bottom line cost savings, audit support, risk avoidance, and business intelligence and reporting. So advantages that most of our clients have experienced, usually not all 5 of those, but at least the majority of those. And so why GTS? And what I say is companies don't need GTS in much the way they didn't need SAP before they implemented SAP. Things seem to be okay, and then you see the changed world, and things are a lot better. You can outsource. A lot of the global trade functions are outsourced to other companies. You can perform manual processes. That's good enough often. And I'm going to use a very compliance-centric term. You can self-blind. And that is not referring to mutilation, but it's referring to knowingly blocking information from entering your purview. Meaning when you're selling something, when you're exporting something, you have an opportunity to learn about who you're doing business with. And if you don't take that opportunity, you're in violation with U.S. export regulations. In much the same way, when you're in a business, there's information about potential cost savings, about perhaps regulations that you aren't following. But we don't all take that in. And I think GTS allows you to fully see the environment that you're operating in. And you don't need GTS if you don't derive cost benefits from your supply chain. If you've determined that is not your core competency, then you probably don't need GTS. If you're not planning to expand geographically, expand your business line, expand your distribution channels, you probably don't need GTS. If you think outsourcing, the advantages and the cost savings of outsourcing outweigh any loss of control, you don't need GTS. And if you have a cheap compliance team but expensive lawyers, you don't need GTS. Because they'll be doing a lot of manual work that they don't have to do. And the lawyers are good enough to keep you out of trouble. And that was in the theme of, you're a redneck. So it was a little tongue-in-cheek. So why is GTS different from its competitors? And a lot of you may not know what the competitors are for GTS, what products those are. But they're very different in structure. And what's great about GTS, and really what's great about all SAP products, is they provide a framework for controlling, calculating, communicating against any trade regulation in the world for any company, any industry, any country. You can't say that about the competitors. Oftentimes, they have the regulations codified in the system. So anytime there's a regulatory change, you wait for your vendor to handle that change and push it to you. In GTS, because it's a framework, you can do it yourself, typically pretty easily. In some things you would need a consultant, and some things you can do yourself. A stark difference between GTS and other products. One area in particular that I want to talk about is licensing. And licensing, export licensing, import licensing, traditionally is, do I have the legal authority to perform some function, some activity, some transaction? And that's what it is. It's a business rule generator. I have a transaction, it has certain attributes, and I want to know whether I can perform that transaction. And in the second bullet there, you'll see it's not just about customs, it's not just about security, it's several different agencies. That's just for the US, and that's just a partial list of some of the regulations you can control with GTS. And most of those we have controlled. When you leave the US, there's several more regulations that you can control. I'm going to go through just 3 examples. There's probably a dozen different examples of things that are going to occur now that have already occurred in the case of encryption regulations in 2009, 2010, and this year, and will be occurring for the next several years. For those of you not familiar with encryption technology, a lot of products, high-tech products, have encryption technology, which from a U.S. perspective is something that they want to control, because if it gets in the wrong hands, you can have some nefarious actions performed with that. You can protect information that the U.S. doesn't necessarily want protected or hidden from them. These regulations, just like the technology, are some of the most complex regulations around. And so the U.S. has decided, let's simplify that. Well, by simplifying it, they actually added regulations. So they didn't really simplify it, but what they did is they made it easier to export. They made it easier for you to get your product into your customers' hands and reduce the waiting period, reduce the constraints that you had. So there are now, with the new simplified regulations, 17 different ways to treat an encryption product. And this affects how you report it, how you control it, who gets the product, what documentary evidence you need to perform an export. That's just the U.S. Every country that you do business in has different export regulations. Not quite as complicated, as the US's, but still complicated and different. So you can't just apply US regulations globally. Now this sounds scary, but it's not. GTS, again, unlike these other competitor tools, allows you to make these changes. And you can go and keep up with all of these regulations by making changes to the master data and making changes to configuration. So you're not waiting for SAP to release a new version of their product. Second example I want to talk about are free trade agreements. So this is the National Export Initiative part of this discussion. Free trade agreements have been underused. There are 17 partners that we do business with, the U.S. does business with, under free trade agreements. There's 3 more that are in process right now. Okay? Until the last version of GTS, or until the current version of GTS, only 2 of those partners were supported from a U.S. perspective, only NAFTA. Now, all of them are supported. And they're all supported using the same structure, basically the same workflow, the same system, just with different rules set up. The thing about FTAs is that you can get in a lot of trouble if you claim preference and you claim that you want to pay reduced duties, but you don't have the documentary evidence supporting that. So if you want to do this in a manual way, it is very difficult. And the choice taken by most companies is don't do it. It's not worth it. It's not worth the risk. GTS allows you to fully automate that. So now you're not doing that work, and GTS is handling that for you. It's retaining the documents, the audit trail, to allow you to take advantage of these free trade agreements. And the third example I'm going to talk about, and this is the last example. Again, there's many more that we can talk about. And this is probably the most significant, is how the consolidation of the regulations is going to take place. There's 2 sets of primary regulations for controlling exports. There's the military goods regulation, it's called ITAR, and the EAR regulation for dual-use products. These are entirely separate. 2 organizations, the State Department and the Commerce Department, control these, and they look nothing like each other. And so in a typical GTS implementation, we needed to set them up separately. Different licenses, different product classification, everything separate. GTS handled it, but now what they're saying is we want to consolidate this. So this is already happening. It's already taking place, the consolidation and the restructure of this. This is going to have a major impact to how GTS performs licensing. The changes, and the important thing here is the changes will be both radical and incremental. They'll take place, they've already taken place, but it won't be a big bang. There'll be some changes, and over time there'll be other changes, and you need to keep up, and your system has to be nimble, and again, that's kind of the point of this, is that GTS will allow you to do that. And much like we mentioned for encryption, as different from other products, GTS will allow you, without any involvement from your vendor, to incorporate these changes. So that's the presentation. I wish I could have put more examples up here to talk to you about, but I want to leave some room for questions. If anyone has any questions about GTS's capabilities and anything we discussed today.